2 weeks halfway up the Andes with Ant Middleton and co. being beasted up and down Chilean mountains in minus 10 degree snowstorms at one point, and plus 15. I think it fluctuated about 20-25 degrees in a day at one point. Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
So where did your sort of lust for these big endurance races come from?
So my background's actually in rugby. 7 or so years ago, I was playing a relatively decent standard semi-pro level, and very, very long story cut short, and I can obviously go into a few more details along the way, but I broke my neck playing the game 7 and a bit years ago. And as a result of that, I was told I couldn't play the game any longer, and a result of that loss of routine, discipline, loss of identity, I struggled with depression that brought on alcoholism, and I went around on a tragic 3-year roundabout of drinking myself silly. I had a moment about 5 years ago where I realised that something needed to change, a moment of clarity, a light bulb moment, call it what you will. And I started attending AA meetings, and it was during the initial steps of the AA program. They talk you through the concept of finding your your higher power. And it can be family, it can be, if you're religious, it can be God. It doesn't really matter what that higher power is. The concept is that you give yourself over to something to help you focus on sobriety. And I realised quite quickly that what I'd lost from rugby was that motivation, that drive to succeed, and the routine and health that came, the sort of healthy training program that came with that. So I then found myself watching the London Marathon in one Sunday morning in 2016, and it hit me. Boom! I need this. This is it. I need a goal. I find it quite hard to motivate myself unless there is a tangible goal in sight. So when we're as humans, we all need drive of some description. For some people, it's medals. For some people, it's recognition. For some people, it's promotion, pay rise, whatever it be. I'm very much the same. I need that motivation in order to push myself forward. And so I signed up for the London Marathon the following year. I gave myself that year to. I broke myself down into a sort of very regimented training program, started eating healthily again, started running, but gradually built it up over the course of a year. Ran the London Marathon, and my then slightly obsessive, call it addictive if you like, but slightly obsessive nature, then thought, well, 26 miles was okay, I can do that. What am I going to do next? And it's grown from there. 42 kilometres became 50 kilometres, became 100 kilometres, and most recently became 100 miles. So it's that constant desire to find my limits. I'm fascinated by what the body is able to achieve. This I call it a contradiction of human capability. So on the one hand, having broken my neck, that we're very fragile. But on the other hand, if we push ourselves, if we train, if we're motivated enough to do something, we're capable of achieving incredible things. Yeah. And that could be climbing Everest. It could be getting a job promotion. It could be sustaining a happy relationship. It doesn't matter what that achievement is. We are capable of pushing ourselves to the limit if we are so inclined.
I need something in the back of my mind to sort of motivate me, to go to the gym or go for a run. Otherwise, I'm quite lazy in a sense. I sort of feel I'm lazy.
I think that goes for everyone, though. I don't think that's just you. I'm exactly the same. And I read a book recently that talked about intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. Yeah. So intrinsic is that just the desire and the satisfaction that comes with achieving something. And 7 years ago for me, it was coming off a rugby field, knowing after a sort of 80 minutes of bruising encounter against an opposition, knowing that I'd given everything that I possibly could, helped support my teammates, played well, etc., etc. That gave me an enormous amount of satisfaction. Nowadays, crossing a finish line of an ultra marathon, it's lovely to get a medal at the end, but that's not why I do it. It's so that I can tell myself I have achieved that goal. And it comes, so I don't know if you've ever heard, there's that US Navy Admiral said, in order to change the world, start by making your bed.
Yeah.
Do you ever hear that?
Yeah.
So it's that sense of achievement. The first thing you do in the morning is you set yourself a goal, however small it is, you accomplish that, and you then set yourself another goal, and it sparks that chain reaction, if you like, of accomplishing certain tasks. For me, it's those small tasks are incredibly important. Of course they are, but I love that long-term setting. In a year's time, I'm going to run 100 miles, and breaking that down and working towards that gives me that focus, which to a certain extent helps me maintain my sobriety, but it's bigger than that. It gives me the drive, and it also gives me the drive in other areas of my life. So to be successful in my career, to have a loving relationship, it all feeds into each other.
Keeping that drive.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I found, like now, let's say, going for a run or doing these ultras, my mind started with, doing these ultras, mine started when I did a half marathon. And as you say, you do one and then you're like, I could do a little better. And I suppose people listening are probably wondering, you got started just by doing that one marathon and then that just snowballed further and further. What's the sort of mindset you go through when you are competing in these ultras? So
for me, it's not. The word competing is an interesting one, because I'm 6'5", I'm 16 stone. I'm not a runner in inverted commas. I'm not built to be a runner, and that's part of the reason that I do it. Actually, is to sort of prove to myself that I can. But I'm never going to be on a podium for anything running related, whether it's sprinting or running 100 miles. So I'm very much in what I call the compete to complete bracket. And in just the motivation for me is just purely getting over the finish line. I will set myself a time frame of how quickly I want to achieve that, but I won't be devastated if it, for example, I ran 100 miles recently and I said I wanted to do it in 24 hours. If I hadn't have done it in 24 hours, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. I would have still been chuffed to have actually accomplished the thing. But whether it's 5 kilometers or whether it's 100 miles, it doesn't matter. And especially recently during lockdown, the importance of physical fitness and the relationship of that to mental fitness has just been multiplied a million times. What with restrictions of the amount of exercise that we're allowed to do, etc., etc. And as I say, for me, it's just the idea of setting myself a goal, breaking that down, working towards it. It might be 100 miles, for example, and 3 weeks beforehand, I'll run 50 miles. 5 weeks beforehand, I'll run 30 miles. You build up towards it, and then that sense of achievement, that satisfaction at crossing the finish line is like any goal in life. I'd perhaps just take it to a slight extreme. Yeah,
of course. Most people would probably be just satisfied with the one marathon and be like, "Oh, I've done that. Okay, great." But of course, most people who probably come on this podcast, they always do sort of extraordinary things and always pushing themselves one further. Because, my sort of recent adventure in 2016 was very much an ultra, but the mindset that you sort of get in your headspace, I think, is massive, and it plays a huge part in how you're framed for that race or that expedition. In terms of, let's say, your last ultra, what was your thinking when you are starting? What's your thinking in terms of how you get to the end? Because a lot of people doing 100 miles, I did a marathon last year, and that was my first official marathon. and you're running and running and running, you're competing, you've got a crowd and they're always cheering you on. But in these ultras, you don't have that. And so you're very much in your own head space. You haven't got someone really cheering you on by the sidelines. So how do you sort of focus your mind to get through that top up? Because I remember kilometer 39, and I only had 3 to go, and I was there like, Jesus, I am struggling here.
Yeah. It's fascinating. This, I mean, we could talk about this for hours. It's fascinating. The mindset, and it's very interesting that you sort of talk about the crowds and the being spurred on, because as you're right, when you're running 100 miles along the Thames, for example, you don't have people spurring you on at all. It comes back to the way that our brains work, and there's a concept that the military used, and we can talk about SAS Who Dares Wins, and the mindset that goes into pushing yourselves to wanting to do that and pushing myself to the limit. There's a concept that the military use whereby when you feel that you're tired, when your mind says, I'm tired, your body is actually capable of doing another 60%. So you've only used about a third of what you have in your tank. So the concept that you're tired, but you could actually do what you've just done again twice if you push yourself is, I find that absolutely incredible. And you should delve into the biology of it all. There's this state that we human beings like being in, biological state called homeostasis. And it's where basically the body is in equilibrium. So your immune system's working, your digestive system's working properly, your heart rate's going at the right speed, you're breathing correctly, etc., etc. And unfortunately, the brain is a bit of a hypochondriac. If it senses that you're no longer you leave that state of homeostasis, the brain tells the body basically to shut down to avoid the onset of fatigue. Now, fatigue is something that scientists have been studying for years and years and years and years, and they still quite haven't cracked what exactly it is, because we as humans don't know what it is. We can keep going, as we're talking about, we can keep going if we continue to push ourselves. But the brain, like any other muscle, I suppose, in the body, it can be trained in that if you are able to tell your brain, actually, no, I'm not tired, I can keep going, then you're able to do these incredible, incredible things. And related to that is the concept of simply pacing yourself. So if you can keep your heart rate at a low enough, then there's no reason that you can't run forever. Yeah. Theoretically, we've been evolved over millions and millions of years into running, terribly, terribly effective running machines. Now, mindset is you mentioned mindset is key to the sort of the endurance equation, if you like, because it's in the really sort of dark patches when you're running in the middle of the night and you're at mile sort of 69 and you've got 31 miles to go, that kind of idea, where the only thing that is going to get you through is actually telling yourself, I can keep going, I can get through. Now, it's a very, very simple trick that I use, and in fact, I found myself laughing to myself. So we talked about this event I did a couple of weeks ago. 100 miles, 161 kilometers, I think. I can remember laughing to myself after a kilometer. My sports tracking watch buzzed and said, "You've done a kilometer." And I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, only 160 kilometers to go." But rather than thinking, "Oh God, I've still got 160 kilometers to go," if you can flip that and put a positive spin on it, and the single word "only" is incredibly powerful in that context. If you can tell yourself that actually it's less than you think it is, and you can sort of put a bit of humor into it and enjoy it, it makes all the difference. And enjoyment is the sort of final piece of the puzzle, I suppose. In that 5 years ago, when I first signed up to a marathon, I was doing it purely because I needed it. I needed to run. I needed a goal, and as I mentioned, it was a means for me to stay sober. Whereas now I run for the the enjoyment of running, but also for the test of wanting to know how far I can push my mind and my body, and purely in terms of distance, but also in a more of a sort of metaphorical way.
I think it was a guy called Ned Phillips who did a really interesting TED talk on sort of mind over matter, and I think he was a Ironman ultra marathon, and his sort of goal was to sort of compete in like big Ironmans in Hawaii, and he said that a lot of people just think that it's to get faster you need to train harder and do this, but actually he then said he saw a guy who gave him 50% mental work and 50% physical work, and most people just shut him out, this guy, because he just sounded mental.
Yeah.
But it was just simple things like count to 1,000 while you're running.
Really?
You have to just be in the moment. And if you can just count, and actually it's really difficult because you're just concentrated on your next footstep. But when you're running and doing these ultras, I mean, I think with me, a lot of the time your mind wanders. It goes off left, right, and center. And apparently if you can just keep focused on exactly what is ahead of you and your mind just doesn't wander, you can actually go so much further than you can ever expect.
Because that's right. I mean, I don't know, I'd challenge that and say that actually when you're doing something as long as a marathon or further, your mind needs to be able to wander. I don't know. You can't focus on one thing for 4 hours. We're just not capable of doing it. So I don't know. I would say actually maybe there's a.
But if you train your mind,
maybe that's very interesting. I'll have to look at that. I don't know because I'd say I'm not sure about that. But I'm sure the guy knows what he's talking about. I thought about some very odd things while I was running in the middle of the night 2 weeks ago. I can't even remember what I was thinking about. But
it's an interesting sort of mindset, and like when I did mine. From Uganda to the Kenyan coast, my mindset was whatever happens, I'm going to complete it. Yeah. It was that I was that sort of focused, and I sort of look back now, and I had food poisoning and I had shin splint. If someone goes, "Do you want to come for a run tomorrow?" I might just, you know what, I've got a bit of a cold. And that's your mindset, and that's exactly how you do. But once you sort of get into it, you can do. Your mind is so much more powerful than you
It is, and there's a very related to that, very interesting. When I talk about doing these, I mean, I fully admit that running 100 miles is not everyone's cup of tea. It's absolutely fine. But when I tell people, people say, "Oh, what did you do at the weekend?" And I say, "Well, actually, I ran 100 miles." A very common response is, "Oh, you must be mental." And well, two. Firstly, you must be mental. Second is, I could never do that. Now, the first of those phrases I sort of question, because actually I think that it is because I'm in my right mind that I'm able to achieve these things, and I'm able to tap into my mindset, my mental resilience, in order to put one foot in front of the other, etc. It's a turn of phrase. Of course, it's a turn of phrase. I appreciate that. And the second one is a turn of phrase as well. I could never do that. Well, if you'd have told me 5 years ago when I was struggling with depression and alcoholism, etc., that I was in 5 years' time going to be running 100-mile ultramarathons, I'd have said, guess what? You must be mental. So it goes to show that. And people say, the most I could ever run is 12 kilometers. Well, as I say, we've evolved into millions of years of evolution has made us capable of doing these things. So it's a case of how you see yourself. Do you see yourself as able to achieve a marathon or an ultra marathon? It doesn't have to be a feat of endurance. It could be, from a sort of negativity point of view, if you're telling yourself, I could never do X, Y, and Z, what else are you telling yourself that you couldn't do? Now, as I say, I admit it's a turn of phrase, but are you being, in your mind, are you being negative about your ability to get a promotion at work or a pay rise? Are you being negative? I could never run an ultramarathon. I could never be happy, be successful, be etc., etc. Now, obviously, it's a case of where do you draw the line, but I do think there is a thought process, a negative thought process that runs through a lot of people's heads instantaneously without them necessarily thinking about it. Whereas if they just changed that ever so slightly and said, "Oh, good, I would never want to do that. I could, but I would never want to." That is just a slight difference that might get them thinking about the other things in positive manner. Does that make sense?
So Nike had this great advert, which is on the similar lines of, if you can run a mile, you can run 5. If you can run 5, you can run a marathon. And it sort of was, I thought at the time, I think it was back in 2013, a really sort of inspiring advert. I mean, Nike do come out with, and that's their sort of mentality of like inspiring athletes. But yeah, I also think, as you said, people get in the sort of negative mindset.
I think, it comes down to us as sort of I don't know, this is getting deep, but it comes down to us as a species. Thousands of years ago. In fact, actually, not thousands of years ago. We'll talk about a certain book a little bit later, but there are tribes in Africa who run after their food. Yeah. And it's called persistence hunting. They run at a certain speed, and the deer runs away, or the antelope runs away, and then eventually the antelope gets so tired that it drops down dead. Whereas a human being is able to sustain that running. So it's it's ingrained in our DNA, the ability to run. Now, if someone turns around to me and says, "Oh, I could only ever run 20 kilometers. Well, why couldn't you run 21 kilometers? And if you can run 21 kilometers, you can run 30. And if you can run 30, you can definitely run a marathon. Yeah. And if you can run a marathon, you can run 50K. Where does it stop? That's the question.
It's putting just limitations on us as humans.
Exactly.
And my sort of thinking is anyone can do a marathon. It's just about how quick you can do it.
Yeah.
I think most people out there and most people listening can walk a marathon, but
you'd be able to eat a lot afterwards to make up for the calories.
Yeah, you can eat a lot. Yeah. That was one thing.
Well, what's one of the main reasons I do these things?
Yeah, I know. You can just eat whatever you want when you do these trips. It's incredible.
My watch, I don't know how accurate this is, but my watch 2 weeks ago told me that I'd burned 25,000 calories doing this 100-miler. That's to say, I'm not sure that's accurate, but it was a good enough excuse to have a KFC at a service station on the way home.
Probably deserved it.
But no, you're right. It's how we. I think it's how we see ourselves. Do we see ourselves in a positive light? Oh, I am able to achieve ABC, doesn't matter what, or is the instantaneous reaction, "Oh, I could never do that," and it sort of gets me thinking, what else are we shutting out?
It shuts down your thinking. Rather than thinking, "I can't do that," think, "How can I do that?" It's opening up a sort of discussion in your head, which sort of says, "What if?" And I think as I said, a lot of people have those limitations, and if they can just rewire or rethink, then I think you can achieve so much more. You've done these ultras around the world. Where have you done them?
So I've done one of my, this is more of a sort of lifetime goal, I'll get to it eventually, is to do a marathon on each continent. Marathon or ultra marathon. I've Ranulph Fiennes several years ago did 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. I don't think I'll ever get round to that. Although I'll never say never. I want to be positive. I'm not ruling it out. But no, just the ability to take on a marathon on every continent would be a fantastic box ticked. I think. There is an official Antarctica marathon. It costs about £15,000. If anyone wants to sponsor me, I would be Pucker Tees can. But I've run the London Marathon. I've run the Paris Marathon. I visited the United States earlier this year and ran a marathon around San Francisco, not an organised one. I just set off. Similarly, I did the same on holiday in Thailand last year. So I've done America, I've done Asia. At some point, I'll get round to South America, Africa, and Australia, and Australasia, and Antarctica, maybe. But yeah, I mean, the most recent ones, obviously during lockdown, have been UK based. I was due to, in March, as lockdown was being announced, I was due to do a multi-day endurance run with a company called Ultra X in Sri Lanka. It was covering 250 kilometers in 5 days through a national park in Sri Lanka, which was supposedly absolutely stunning with elephants wandering around. That was cancelled, obviously. So I decided to run the distance. I decided to run the distance anyway in London. So I just plodded around the streets of London for 5 days and ran 250 kilometres. But I was raising money for the Mental Health Foundation, so it seemed pertinent to stick to the promise of taking on such a challenge, albeit not in 35-degree heat and 95% humidity on an island in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah. And I suppose most people who maybe recognise your face might recognise you from the Channel 4 SAS Who Dares Wins.
Indeed, yes. This is
what made you do that?
Well, it was another stepping stone, if you like, in the challenging my limits journey. And I was very fortunate in it. It came at a time in between various other challenges that I hadn't been taking on and what was planning to do, and through sort of a very long selection process where I did various fitness tests and psychological evaluations and interviews to camera, etc., etc. I was selected, and I flew off in September. Where are we now? September 2018. Spent 2 weeks halfway up the Andes with Ant Middleton and co, being beasted up and down Chilean mountains in minus 10 degree snowstorms at one point, and plus 15. I think it fluctuated about 20-25 degrees in a day at one point. So a lot of it was personal learning, personal admin, and how to take care of ourselves and use the right kit, etc. But the premise of the Special Forces, I mentioned earlier, this military mindset that you have more in the tank than you think you do, is what it's all about. And it's not being the fastest, the fittest, the strongest, the best. It's about getting over the metaphorical finish line. Now, for the Special Forces, that might be lugging 100 kilos of kit 10 miles over an Afghanistan mountain range, conducting an operation and then lugging it all back. But the concept of getting over that challenge, pushing yourself, the mindset that comes with that, the resilience that is required, and also the discipline. It was a fascinating 2 weeks. Brilliant, best thing I've ever done. But genuinely learnt a hell of a lot from Middleton and the directing staff who took us on this journey, and sort of whittled us down over a course of 2 weeks. And I was one of 8 that got through to the final day for the infamous escape and evasion and interrogation phase, where you're starved for 48 hours and then set off and chased by dogs and militia with machine guns and helicopters. And it's all sort of a bit ridiculous, but great fun. And then you're hooded and taken back to base, and you have to learn this story as to who you are, and sort of resist interrogation while they're playing women screaming in headphones and making you stand in tortuous stress positions. And as someone who's got a bad neck, those stress positions were pretty hideous. I wouldn't wish them on my worst enemy. But it was a phenomenal exercise in learning to understand my capabilities, and it made me want to push myself further in the endurance event arena. I sort of got back from that thinking, right, I can last 2 weeks in the Andes, albeit only 6 hours of stress positions and not 18, like I think the guys who finally passed did. But I can last being made to run up and down mountains 3,500 meters above sea level. I can probably last a few few long distance running events. So again, it was a case of what's next?
Set you up for what you were doing next.
Yeah, absolutely. That was 2018. It aired in early 2019. 2019, I didn't do any specific long distance running events. I set myself a year-long target of running 2019 miles that year. And then I took on a couple of more focused endurance events earlier this year.
Yeah, I suppose with a lot of people who do sort of big trips, training is obviously a massive part for you because I follow you on Instagram and I see you sort of done 25 miles here, 30 miles there, and you train incredibly hard for these events. I
do, but the beauty of an endurance event is that this might sound like an odd thing to say, but fitness is by far probably the least important component of completing an endurance event. Mindset, number one. Pacing, probably number two. Eating enough calories to get you through it. I probably didn't burn 25,000 calories like my watch said, but I burned a fair few and had to keep them coming in order to simply fuel my body. Admin, so avoiding wearing the right socks, avoiding blisters, knowing when to apply. I put coconut oil on various areas of my body to prevent chafing. I wear plasters over my nipples to prevent rubbing. Those kinds of things. Basic sort of first aid kit and how to manage your body and your kit. Sort of change a pair of socks halfway through that so the feet aren't getting too sweaty. Little things like that. Probably number 4, and then fitness right down at the bottom. So you imagine a sort of pie chart. Fitness is probably a sort of 10% little sliver. Mindset might be, I don't know, 40%. That's half of it. Divide the other 50% up into fairly equal slivers, pieces of the pie, and that's the sort of components of running an endurance event. But my point being that actually fitness, yes, you've got to be able to run a certain distance, but it comes back to the conversation we're having about once you can run a certain distance, as long as you have the right mindset, pace yourself, eat the right things, and look after yourself, you can run any distance.
I suppose people listening to that before you got onto that would be like, oh, so anyone can do these?
But no, that's the point. Anyone can.
Yeah.
I will go back to the point that 5 years ago I was, struggling to overcome alcohol addiction and feeling sorry for myself. Hadn't done any exercise for about 3 years since being made to quit playing rugby. There was no chance in hell I was thinking of running an ultramarathon. But with the right outlook, the right mindset, and a little bit of physical training, a little bit of fitness training, anyone can do it. I genuinely mean that. Anyone can do it.
I have a confession. For my ultras, I did probably nowhere near enough training. But in terms of mind, I was just like, well, it doesn't matter what happens. If I can walk, I will just walk ahead, and if I can crawl, I can crawl.
Do you know what? Walking is a very important part of endurance. So I used to walk up the hills running
and run down.
Yeah. There's a sort of famous ultra-marathon adage that if you can't see the top of the hill, walk. And that is sort of widely accepted by the ultra-marathon community. If you can't see the top of the hill, walk, because there's no point spending what is probably only going to be 3 minutes busting your ass up a hill when you can just sort of take a breather and then run down the other side. In the grand context of an event which might be anywhere between sort of 10 and 30 hours long, 3 minutes isn't going to make any difference. No. So it adds to the enjoyment as well. Actually, sometimes if you want to spend a couple of minutes walking halfway through an endurance, an ultramarathon, actually you get to sort of appreciate the surroundings, and you might end up spending 2 minutes at an aid station having a chat with someone and just sort of saying thank you to the supporters. It all adds to the environment. It adds to the sort of camaraderie. It adds to the whole enjoyment of an event like that. I mean, obviously there are some people that are going to run these things in ridiculously quick times and fly through and run a kilometre every 5 minutes for non-stop for 15 hours. That is absolutely incredible. But we're talking a minute percentage of a percentage, minute number of people that are able to do that. The average normal people amongst us, it's just a case of enjoy it, walk it, crawl it. It doesn't matter. Get over the finish line and get that sense of satisfaction of having accomplished a task, much like making your bed in the morning.
Yeah. So we ask the same 5 questions to every guest each week, and so my first question to you is, on your trips and expeditions, what's the one thing you really crave or miss from home?
I mean, I'm a big foodie. I didn't get to being 16 stone by starving myself. So probably pizza, something like that. And again, I mean this very seriously. When you've put yourself through 20 plus hours of fairly grim, arduous endeavour, and burned X number of calories, you've got to replenish it somehow. So enjoy yourself afterwards, and if you're obviously sort of eating relatively healthily in the build up to something like this, half of the joy is eating. In fact, there's another famous ultramarathon phrase. I forget who said it, but a famous ultramarathon runner once said that an ultramarathon is not a running race, it's an eating and drinking race with a bit of scenery thrown in. So you carb load for 2 days beforehand, you fill yourself with nuts and snacks and sweets and Coke and watermelon, whatever it is. I survived about 50 miles, the last 50 miles of the Thames Bath 100 on Coke and watermelon because my stomach was doing funny things, and but getting the calories on board before, during and after is half of the fun.
What was your favourite adventure book?
So very recently, in relation to running the Thames Bath 100, I picked up, and I'm sort of a bit late to it, but picked up a copy of Born to Run by an American journalist called Christopher McDougall, and it tracks the story of a tribe of Mexican runners called the Tarahumara, I think they're called. And they are the world's most naturally gifted runners. They run 30 miles a day in sandals just for the pure love of doing it. But it goes into really, really fascinating stories of how we have evolved from chimpanzees and how we've evolved, despite the fact that we are 95% the same as chimpanzees. We've evolved our Achilles tendons, and a ligament that runs up the back of our neck has evolved us into running animals as opposed to walking animals. And it also talks about how basically Nike have ruined us as runners. I don't want to be too disparaging to Nike, but the fact that everyone wears trainers that are highly supportive and cushioned has weakened our feet and legs and ligaments. Actually, it sort of talks about the benefits of barefoot running. Now, I fully admit I wear a pair of trainers when I run, but I'm very fascinated, very interested in actually looking at a slightly more flimsy pair of running shoes as an alternative. And there's that sort of evolution and the fact that we are naturally ingrained, we have running naturally ingrained into us, the fact that there are tribes in Africa who hunt antelope by running after them. I was reading it out loud to my girlfriend, and basically I sort of read the book out loud to her because I was so fascinated in it, and she got incredibly frustrated in me and said, "Shut up, I'll read it myself." But no, I loved it. Really, really great book.
Yeah, that was the book I read just before my run in Kenya. And I didn't quite get to the end before my run, but I did have barefoot running shoes at the time, which I think anyone who knows me or has seen me absolutely despises them because they look like little frog's legs.
You get some that look like you've got sort of individual toes, and they look. I think they look ridiculous well. But there are better looking alternatives that I'm delving into, sort of researching at the moment.
What was your inspirational figure growing up?
I don't think we can have one. You can't have one figure. When I was 10, I mean, it's changed throughout my childhood and my adult life. When I was 10, I had Michael Jordan plastered all over my bedroom walls because of his work ethic. He was the first properly, truly global superstar in the sporting field. The Chicago Bulls were winning everything. They won three titles on the bounce, and then another 3 later in the 90s. And he was the sort of the epitome of the hard-working, inspirational athlete. As a rugby player, about the same sort of time, Jonah Lomu was running over the top of every opposition, England included. 1995 Rugby World Cup, Jonah Lomu decimated England single-handedly. And as an English fan, it was as an 11, 10-year-old English fan, it was pretty traumatic, but at the same time, it was incredible to watch. Fast forward a few years, still on the rugby field, I suppose. 2003 was obviously a great year for England. We're still living it. Martin Johnson was the talismanic captain. Johnny Wilkinson, again, the sort of work ethic of him was what brought us home the Webb Ellis Cup. Fast forward a bit further, and these days it's more those individuals in the running community that, I mean, I look back at the likes of Roger Bannister, who in the 50s achieved something that no one thought was possible in the 4-minute mile. And Elliot Kipchoge has just done something similar for the 2-hour marathon. So it's those individuals that basically everyone writes off, and people say, oh, it's not possible to do X, Y, and Z, and these people go ahead and bloody do it anyway. You know, like Edmund Hillary's, and no one thought it was possible to climb Everest. He went and did it. And there's a guy called Ross Edgley who a couple of years ago swam the entire way around Britain. Everyone said, you're absolutely nuts. It's not possible. Well, he went and did it. 5 months or something at sea, and he came back with all his fingers had fallen off and his tongue had corroded. But I mean, absolutely incredible story. So I think, most inspirational figures, it changes as well.
But it's something like that 4-minute mile was, at the time, everyone said it isn't possible, but now I think something like 30,000 people have done it.
Hundreds and thousands of people have done it since, as have climbed Everest. And it's that, again, it comes down to mindset. Yeah. If you tell someone it can't be done, the first person to actually think, well, hang on a minute, why can't it be done?
They'll just see it as a challenge.
It's a trendsetter, and then everyone thinks, well, obviously, now it can be done, I'm going to go and do it as well. But there's that mental blocker until someone actually goes and proves everyone else wrong. There's that mental blocker in the entire of the rest of society. Whereas now it's not an easy thing to do, far from it. But as you say, many people have done it since.
Another question is favourite quote.
Favourite quote. So I read this recently, actually. It was in the Born to Run book, and it's an African proverb, thank you, but attributed to Roger Bannister. Used it at one point, and it goes, I hopefully don't misquote it too badly because it's a reasonably long one, but it goes something along the lines of, in Africa, every morning a gazelle wakes up and he knows that in order to live, he has to outrun the fastest lion. Meanwhile, in Africa, every morning, a lion wakes up and he knows that in order to eat, he has to outrun the fastest gazelle. Whether you're a gazelle or a lion, when the sun comes up, you better be running.
It's such a great quote.
I loved it. And I mean, for me, it's not just about running. It's about all aspects of life. If you want to succeed, get up and go for it. Don't tell yourself you can't do it. Go running. And go running could be, as we talked about, job promotions and families and whatever it be, but just go and bloody do it. Don't tell yourself you can't.
So a lot of people listening are probably keen to go on their big trip or their big endurance race. What sort of advice would you give people to get started?
To get started, my advice would be, it doesn't matter where you get started. Might seem like a bit of a naff thing to say, but I started. I gave myself a year to train to run a marathon, and a year is a hell of a long time. You can train for a marathon in 3 months. So it doesn't matter where you get started. Pick a goal, set yourself a training regime, or it might be a goal in a non-athletic perspective, but let's say a goal in a running goal. Set yourself a training program, work up to it, be realistic in terms of the time that you need to achieve it. Don't oversell yourself, because then that will only lead to disappointment. Give yourself a nice reasonable time frame to build up to it. Go and smash it out of the park, and give yourself that amazing sense of satisfaction that comes with it, and then reassess whether you want to do it again or push yourself further. But just starting is the best way of starting.
And I completely agree with that. And so people listening, how can they find you? How can they follow you? And what are you doing now?
So I'm on Instagram at James Gwinnett, GWINNETT. I am recovering from running 100 miles 2 weeks ago, but I'm already setting my sights on going further. I'm moving to Bath actually shortly, and I've found a run from London to Bristol that goes through Bath along the various different canals. That's 145 miles, which is in July next year. So I figure I've run 100 miles. What's another 45? I'd like to run the Pennine Way, which is 250 odd, something like that, over a course of several days. The length of the Thames has been bandied about. The Three Peaks from Ben Nevis down to Snowdon, that's about 400, but we're talking a bit of planning and a few years down the line for that. But the idea to be sort of build up and just keep going further until my body says no, or my mind. But it'll be my body that says no before my mind. I hope.
Oh, that's awesome. And thank you so much for coming in, and thank you so much for chatting with us today.
My absolute pleasure. It's great to talk to a fellow endurance enthusiast and chew the fat. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And I would run unsupported because I've always believed in unsupported challenges. I think you're more immersed in the culture and the community when you do it that way. And no one had ever done that. No one had ever crossed Kyrgyzstan on foot in recorded history. I mean, I'm sure lots of people have, but I mean, running in this way had never been done.